Welcome to the Expanding Consciousness podcast with your hosts, Michael Wally and Nikolas and Michael. In this podcast, we explore ways to sharpen our awareness, make life more enjoyable, be a little kinder, become more authentic, less reactive, more present, and ultimately expand our consciousness. We're happy to have you along for the ride, and if you do enjoy these conversations, please leave a review or a comment, as this goes a long way for us. Enough of the promotional talk, and enjoy this episode. Welcome to the episode this week. We have another guest today. With us today is Shari Kaplan, who's a clinical psychotherapist with over 30 years of experience. And she's working with somatic awareness, with internal family systems, with Jungian therapy, but also with plant medicine. So really sounds like an awesome combination to me. I think this is the kind of things I would be looking out for if I'm looking for a therapist. You know, if they're expert in all of these domains, that would be absolutely great. So I think we have plenty of topics to talk about. And on top of that, she also developed her own protocols and framework to kind of create integrative frameworks that combine these things. So we can also dive into that a little bit. But yeah, first of all, thank you, Shari, for taking the time for the conversation today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited for the conversation.
Awesome. So yeah, I don't know where to start, but maybe it would be interesting also to know a bit about your story. So maybe you can tell us a little bit, what would we need to know to understand your work today and like where you're coming from?
I think to understand my work, it probably would be that my son was born with a central nervous system disorder, which got me into a deep dive of studying neuroanatomy. And from there, I developed plant medicine formulas to try to help him heal, along with developing protocols to integrate his brain and body. So he was a 4-year-old hand flapping, circle spinning, nonverbal 4-year-old. And I was told that he had severe autism. And he did not. But I demanded MRIs and EEGs, which they didn't want to give me. And what happened was he had brain damage in his frontal lobe on his right. He had something growing in mass effect on his hippocampus. And he had a movement disorder and a seizure disorder. And I'm a very big science geek. And Albert Einstein says light bends around a mass and sound frequencies, light. So I decided to research sound frequencies and what parts of the body activate what parts of the brain. And I started using tuning forks and sounds and plants and to refire and rewire his brain. I also did physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. I also used a few therapeutic listening programs because I knew that he needed different sound in order for him to make the sound and the words. I also did a lot of exercising with him while I was teaching him how to speak. Like I put him on an elliptical and had him hold on and showed pictures and it out what the pictures were and said the words and that's really how his speech started developing because we were moving his body and his mind. And I started realizing that my patients who had trauma were very similar to the neurological challenges that he had, and also the children in New York that I worked with who had neurodevelopmental challenges. So I spoke to Bessel van der Kolk and Stephen Porges about it because I was working with both of them on different cases. And they said, that's really interesting. We should do a study on it. So they did. And so now the world knows that trauma and autism are neurobiologically similar. But it also helped me develop the frameworks for treating patients and realizing that people's learning styles and the way they develop is very significantly a part of their behavior and their mental health. And so I started treating all of it together for my patients, and my patients were healing. So I created a program where I would see patients intensively 2 hours a day, 5 days a week for 6 weeks. So these are people who were either down because of a chronic illness and they were bouncing back into their life and they didn't feel like they could get back into their life. they may have had like a bipolar episode, a manic episode, or a depressive episode, and they really just needed to get back up and running. And so that program, you can imagine if you see somebody 2 hours a day, 5 days a week for 6 weeks, and you are literally having the opportunity to retrain their brain and body at the same time. It's been incredibly successful. And I think it's a really helpful framework for us to be helping a lot of people.
Great. Thanks for sharing your personal story. I understand now like how it influenced also your professional career afterwards, and it's fascinating that you didn't reach only for whatever was available based on science, but also did your own research. Do you want to share a bit more because you mentioned plant medicine? Like, how did you use how does that come into the picture?
So, my son's sympathetic nervous system was like off the charts, right? So, if your central nervous system is off, it's very hard to pivot. So, something as simple as, sweetheart, like that cup's not good for you. Let me give you another cup could just send him through the roof. Or saying we're going to go to the playground in 5 minutes. It's like his system couldn't organize enough to realize that it was something he wanted to do. So he would have another meltdown. Plants work on sound frequencies, herbal plants, all plants. So they have different frequencies. So I started researching that. And then I started stumbling on studies from around the world. Germany obviously has a lot. And started realizing that there were plants that could kind of act like anticonvulsants. They can act in certain ways, right? So, of course, we can't say it heals this or cures it, but you can see the studies that people who have Parkinson's, when they took these plants in a certain combination, their movements got better. So, I started putting together the studies, and I have to say, I came across some very generous scientists because I would call up the universities and say, "Hi, I'm Shari Kaplan, and I have a son who's 4 years old, and I was wondering if I could give the dosing you have in your study to my son." And they, after a very long conversation, they were very generous and helped me figure it out. And so I started building a formula that would dampen his sympathetic nervous system and stimulate his parasympathetic nervous system. So I don't know if you have patients who don't know or people who are listening, your parasympathetic is more the part of your sympathetic nervous system, I'm sorry, your nervous system that helps you calm down. So like they call it the rest and digest, right? So I was trying to help his body calm down. And I started out there and I treated a lot of physicians who had trauma. So they would come into my office and they would smell these delicious plants on me. And they're like, "Wow, you smell so good." And I said, "Well, I was just making some plant formulas for my son." And they're like, "What do you mean?" So I explained, and they said, "Well, I have gout, I have GERD, I have a torn rotator cuff. Could you make something?" And I said, "Well, I'll do the research, but I can see if it'll work." And sure enough, it worked. And I just think it was thorough research and being able to put it together the way, I don't know, it worked. And I came up with like 200 formulas that are for all different illnesses, symptoms that seem to help the body. And in my experience, I feel like herbal plant medicine gets your body back to homeostasis where it can heal. That's what it seems like to me. So you have some plants that activate that and you have some plants that calm it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, sure.
So when I want to say back in 2013, there was a doctor in California called Dr. Alan Frankel. And he was an amazing man, generous doctor. And I saw him on one of my nutrition websites. So I called up his office and I said, "Can I schedule an hour consultation with him? I just want to talk about my patients. I want to talk about my son. And I want to see if medical cannabis, like how it works, why it works." But it sounded like it was very important. So after we're on the phone for 3 hours, he says, "You clearly know about plants. He goes, "Why don't you come out to my clinic? I will train you on how to use medical cannabis. I'll teach you how to grow it, how to manufacture it. And maybe you'll learn something that you can bring back. And when it becomes legal in Florida, you'll know." So I kept flying out there as often as I could to work with him. But 4 days after our conversation, I was in his office and just got an incredible education by sitting with patient after patient, by going to where they grew the plants and extracted them. And I said to him one day, I go, it seems like the cannabis would be a really good carrier formula for my plants, because you have this major plant that can do a lot of things, but you could actually focus the medicine if you use these other herbal plants. And I kind of saw it like chicken soup. So I was very fortunate that I've always gotten to be put in front of somebody who was doing something important. So Dr. Raphael Meshulam, do you know who he was? So he's the grandfather of cannabis medicine. And he was the one who discovered, him and his team discovered the THC molecules, and that our bodies actually have an endocannabinoid system. Endo meaning inside, cannabinoid meaning the compounds that are in plants. We make them ourselves. And so I was fortunate enough to have like an hour and a half consultation with him. And I was sharing with him how I was using herbal plants with cannabis. And he was 83 years old at the time. And he said to me, "Sweetheart, if only I wasn't 83." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I think what you're doing is the future of cannabis medicine." And so I took that to heart and I kept doing what I was doing. And I actually have been able to make this formula, which is THCA and CBDA and 5 other herbal plants. And it really seems to modulate the central nervous system and the body, so that when patients come in that are dysregulated, it's an incredible regulator. Like no meds, nothing. You can be on meds and it will still regulate you. And people will call me the next day after taking 2 doses and saying, like, that was a game changer. And so we have a lot of people in our practice on it, not because they have to be, but because they realize that it is just such a, it's bone cell growth, brain cell growth, and it's antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal. Like there's anti-inflammatory, anti-convulsant properties. Like there's such good stuff in it. So there are and it's non intoxicating, by the way. So if you
Okay.
don't heat cannabis up to 250 degrees, it is not intoxicating. And the THCA, stands for acid, and that's like the raw form. So I always say it's raw broccoli versus cooked broccoli. Like there's really great properties in both, but they're slightly different.
Right. So this reminds me a lot. I remember, I guess around that time as well, when CBD was getting popularized. There were studies around, what is it called, Parkinson's, and which
Yes,
is kind of a psychomotoric problem, let's say. And then people will take this kind of high dose CBD oil, I suppose it would be that. And then you could see in these videos, even nowadays, you have them online, the immediate, like almost immediate effect. Within half an hour, the nervous system would really calm down, and people would be without this, typical
the
problem,
tremor.
the tremors, right? It will calm down the tremors. So is it? Is it similar to the kind of the tinctures that you are creating?
So, yes, it's similar, except CBD has been heated to 250 degrees.
Okay.
I have, and by the way, like I have seen thousands of patients for medical cannabis with my doctors.
Mhm.
I've never seen CBD work on someone with Parkinson's. I've seen inhaling THC and most importantly, THCV. THCV is for variant and it's another cannabinoid in cannabis, but that's the one that really helps with the movements. But I've never seen anybody take CBD who has Parkinson's and it stops their tremors. or it helps with the freeze effect.
Hmm.
But I do know that my patients who inhale, and when we've been able to get them THCV or they've been able to get THCV products. So let's see, Durban Poison and Doug's Varian and Jack the Ripper, like those are some strain that have more THCV in it, but there's even other ones as well that I'm just not thinking of off the top of my head. But inhalation usually stops the Parkinson's tremors pretty
Hmm.
quickly. What I would say though is ketamine assisted therapy for people who have tremors, movements, Parkinson's works amazing because ketamine, one of the things it does is elevates dopamine, right? So we've had people come in who have movement disorders or Parkinson's, and you give them not even high doses, like 30 milligrams. So the average is 1 milligram per kilogram. Don't even need that. Their whole body quiets down. And then, if they're a medical cannabis patient as well, they can take the CBDA THCA formula. And it seems like it allows the ketamine to be modulated into the system for longer than just 72 hours. And our patients have fewer and fewer tremors and movements. And when they maintain using cannabis, they report they have so much fewer tremors. And so if they do it regularly, the ketamine treatments on low doses, their symptoms are very well managed.
Interesting.
It's exciting.
Very cool. I'm actually in a psychedelic therapy assisted training program right now and had my second ketamine session yesterday. So very, very interested in all of this. And combining it with the cannabis, I also find very, very interesting. I'm kind of curious around like the ketamine protocol that you use. Is there, I mean, once you're administering ketamine, are people like sitting for some sort of talk therapy session, or are they just kind of sitting in more like a guided somatic, or what does it look like?
So I have a functional medicine psychiatrist who works at my center. And so that's who does all the medical evaluations and what have you. And then we decide, are we going to microdose ketamine during therapy, or are we going to do the larger doses, the anxiolytic doses that give you the psychedelic experience? And really, depending on the patient, their symptoms, what we're trying to accomplish. And because the people that we're doing ketamine assisted therapy on are usually the patients that came to us to be our mental health patients, I have the opportunity to microdose them during session to see how they respond. And it's a good indication whether or not we should go on to a larger dose or not. And it just depends what you're trying to accomplish with that person and what their needs are. The reason I like the microdosing during session, and by the way, let me just say, I got certified as a medical assistant so that I could inject the patients myself. Because what I find is if somebody else injects them, they start having a conversation with them. And everything you talk about right before you go into ketamine and right when you come out of ketamine is just a very vulnerable place to be. And I don't want anybody talking to the patient once they're set and ready to go and say, "So, how are you doing? How was your week?" They're in the perfect place. So, I find that being able to inject them and be the last person to talk to them and the first person to talk to them on their way out when we're doing the anxiolytic doses has really improved the outcomes of focusing the patient in the direction that they want to be moving on and moving in, being able to integrate their experience and just being right there on the spot to do it really helps tremendously. And in session, the microdosing has been super helpful, especially for people who are neurodivergent, whose brains lock up quickly and easily. So, people who have trauma and it's very hard for them to get unstuck just to have a conversation. So, obviously, in those circumstances, you really want to have a good relationship and they feel safe with you before you would consider doing that. But what I find is it's going to be harder for them to grasp for their words because you're quieting the limbic system. But if you only give like 12 milligrams intramuscularly, which is probably 25 milligrams orally, it then allows you to be able to get to material that they might not have been able to share when their brain's kind of in lockdown and they're trapped in there. And what I found, this was really interesting. I worked with a couple of people who had cerebral palsy, adults, is 1 time a week microdosing changed their behavior for the whole week. Because when you have them in the microdosing, you talk solutions. You talk about, I'm no longer willing to allow my brain to loop on this, and I'm going to focus on this instead. Right. And so, how do you do that? Well, now I have to connect them to their body. Where are you feeling this in your body? I'll do EMDR while they have the ketamine and target. I think EMDR, and I mean, somatic work is a part of EMDR. I don't know why we think it's separate, but it is a part of EMDR. And so you are targeting, where do you feel that in your body? I like to add in, if it could talk, what would it say? How old does it feel? What do you think it's trying to help you with, coming from IFS? I think as a woman, this is what I've learned is I'm a mom, and nurturing is just a part of who I am. And it's very easy for me to love on and teach somebody to love on their younger ego states. And what I find is there are some men and women, but mostly men, who have a harder time with that nurturing because it doesn't work that way. And I find that IM seems to work a little bit better because, if we went to like primal stuff, right? Men typically identify with what they do, right? I am a doctor. I am a therapist. I am an attorney. I am. And I say, I do therapy. I do herbal plant medicine. I do psychedelic assisted therapy or ketamine assisted therapy. I do parenting. I am a mom, though. That's my favorite role of all time. But I love this. And I always say, thank God I love what I do because I would have hated leaving my children to go do it. So, I mean, this to me is when you go into this field, and I think anyone who doesn't go into it for this reason, it's like you are here because you realize people are suffering and they can't get out of their own way. And we need to help them get their mind, like to master their body and focus their mind. And so, if we understand what's going on neurologically in their body and that emotions are coming up and it's coming up in different ways, if we understand that chronic pain comes from where your brain registers pain in the brain, which is your limbic system, right? That's the major part that registers pain. We have to soothe that. We have to be able to soothe that. And that means we have to get their fight and flight under control. So that's where your breath work and your meditation and like neurodynamic exercises, tightening your gut, bilaterally stimulating. There's so many different ways. Eye movements, up, down, side, a figure eight. All of these things unlock the body so the patient can then take control of their mind. And the ketamine is a lubricant. It is not the magic. The therapist and the patient and that therapeutic alliance is the magic. And how you build that relationship and how you teach that patient about their body and their brain. And I say, like, here's your brain, here is you, your mind, and here is yourself. I like to call it your soul, but I know we're not supposed to do that in psychology. So here's yourself. And it's the highest, wisest part of who you are. And you, your mind, has the opportunity to say, I'm going to listen over here, which is when I'm in flow and everything's going great. Like that's myself, my creative, compassionate, dynamic, loving, curious, compassionate individual is myself. All of my strengths, that's who I truly am. And my mind can choose to align with her or I listen to this monkey brain that is all about seeking pleasure and surviving. And it's been trained, and our computer holds all that training, right? And we have the opportunity to learn how to calm this brain and help it feel safe and empowered. We can go into the computer and change the websites we're going to, but we need to know how to do that as clinicians so that we know how to focus, master that body response, understand what's going on in our body so we can focus our minds and that we can help our patients do the same. And I think it's a great way of empowering patients because you're the instrument in their healing.
Yeah. Your approach really resonates with me, especially the way that it sounds very tailored to the individual. I'm really curious around, I mean, you're kind of referencing a lot of different techniques that you might use to help calm the nervous system from like breath work and self touch and everything. Are there any kind of go to techniques that you tend to employ with most people, or is it really just highly catered towards the individual, like whatever resonates with you, whatever you can actually pick up and use?
So I have a toolbox, and depending on someone's learning style, right? So think the one thing I teach everybody from day one, like even when I do their biopsychosocial, is I teach people to breathe in through their nose as if it's going into the center of their brain and take it down their spine. Imagine taking it down your spine to your tailbone. When you get to your tailbone, you're exhaling out through your nose again and you're imagining that breath going all the way up your spine and out the top of your head. So your breath in is shorter than your breath out, obviously, to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. So then I'll do it with them 3 times. And if you want, we can try it. Just breathe in through your nose, send it down your spine to your tailbone, exhale back up through your spine, through the center of your head, and all the way out the top, 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 top. And then take your next breath when you're ready. Breathe in, send it all the way down to your tailbone. When you're ready, up, all the way up, 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 and out the top of your head. Keep it going, keep it going, keep it going. And when you're ready, take your third breath in, all the way down to your tailbone, back up through your spine, through the center of your head, and all the way out the top. Easy peasy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it works really quickly. I haven't had anybody say no to that one.
Cool, cool. So
Yeah.
that was kind of gonna be my next question is if you have people that are kind of resistant towards working with the breath and kind of feeling into the body because it's maybe not safe initially, and if there's kind of a way to ease them into that.
Well, so I'll teach that before I ever talk to them about feeling into their body yet.
Mm.
Right.
Mhm.
And I do think that like if you're connected to yourself, it makes it so much easier for them. Right. So, I mean, I do a lot of preparation before I show up in the morning. Like my friends and colleagues tease me because I'm up at 4 a.m. And it's because I want to do my own breath work, my own chanting, my own meditation. I want to go for a run and I want to get myself ready. And in between patients, I'll either do 10 push ups or 10 squats. And the reason being is I want to reset for the next person and do that breath work. And we now know, based on longevity studies and what have you, if every hour we all did 10 squats, our brain health would improve significantly. To me, it was just a resetting thing. I haven't really had anyone be resistant to breathing. I don't know that anyone's been resistant to anything other than, and then they give in. When I'm doing releasing work, right? So when you finally connect somebody, this is like during their treatment, to their anger and their pain. And you do some EMDR repair work, right? Where you're changing I'm not safe to I am safe. And you get them to that place and they feel great. The truth of the matter is, if they weren't safe and there's a kid inside of them that's still kind of angry. And anger is good. And I tell everybody, anger is a really helpful emotion. It says, hey, this isn't okay with me. And if something's not okay with you, you have 2 options. You change your situation or you change the way you relate to it. So now that you change the narrative, you have to release the anger from the body because it was never okay that someone made them feel powerless. And they really were powerless or unsafe. So I go over to my couch, I put pillows on the floor, And I'm like, we're going to take our fists and using the karate chop part, we're going to punch as hard and as fast as we can for 30 seconds. And I get a little resistance on that because people will be like, oh, I feel so silly. And I'm like, I'm going to do it with you. You don't have to worry. And we'll do it together. And I do 3 rounds of it. And people are so relieved of their rage, their pain. And so they can feel it in their body because we'll scan the body to feel where you feel it. Then we'll punch and we'll do it again 3 times. That one I've gotten a little resistance to, but they do it anyway because I always say, listen, I don't want you to do anything you don't want to do. I just want to share with you how I think it's going to help you. And if you're willing to, we'll do it. And I think that just being genuine and acknowledging them and acknowledging where they're at. And I'll even say to people when I'm doing the biopsychosocial, listen, we don't really know each other that well. So if I ask you a question and you don't feel comfortable answering it just because we don't know each other well enough yet, I would rather you tell me, can I answer that another time instead of telling me something that misrepresents the truth. And I think that giving them like those little subtle nuances as a therapist, when you acknowledge and validate, and I just think people appreciate that and they feel more safe to try things. And by the time someone comes to me, they've tried so many things that they're just so desperate to get better. And I think they're willing to go along with most of the stuff. Maybe if I was number 1 in the queue, I would have to do a little bit more convincing. I don't know.
I'm kind of curious around your thoughts around kind of working with anger or any other kind of charged emotion in terms of when is expression like actually productive in terms of like you're saying, beating on pillows to kind of like release some rage or anger. It does seem like there are times where you can do that and it's very superficial and it doesn't actually move any anger. It doesn't actually make like overall progress. So I'm kind of curious around like maybe some of the nuances around like, okay, when are they ready to actually do this or what, in what way do they engage with it? I noticed that you said something like we feel it in the body first, which kind of I
Mm.
caught on to that. But I'm curious around sort of more the nuance.
So, like I said too, my biopsychosocial is like really thorough from the time you're in your mother's womb until your present day life. So you're getting a pretty good picture of the person because you're going through every aspect of their life. And, medically, occasionally, attachment wise with their family, who put stress on the family, who were their friend groups in school, how did they do, how did they develop, did they go to churches, synagogues, mosques, like what did they do, what were they taught about religion, what were they taught about spirituality, what's their day-to-day life like, what was it like as a kid. When I ask about someone's parents, I say, tell me who your mom was as a person. And everyone's like, what? Like, if I was to meet her, like, who is she? And then I say, now tell me who she was as a mom when you were a kid and it was time for bath time and being tucked in at bed. And you really see a lot in somebody, like where there are glitches, where there were strengths, and then who put stress on the family besides just like mom, dad, siblings, were there outside forces? Because sometimes we forget that like someone's neighborhood was dangerous or there was a threat from an uncle or like we just don't know unless we ask. And so I had a woman who was traumatized in church just by like how she conceptualized what she was being taught. And so she was walking around in life with severe OCD, believing she was bad. And because no one ever spoke to her about her religious or spiritual experiences, nobody understood that that's where it was coming from. And I think that it's really important that when we're looking at a person, we're looking at a spiritual being, human ecosystem, and organism, and who their identity is in this lifetime and how they connect with others. Like you have to look at all of it and how they take care of their human. And I think when we start realizing that, like, this is an ecosystem of parasites, fungus, viruses, bacteria, and cells, and what it needs in order to function, I think that so much of mental health, when we take care of that piece along with the modalities of mental health, it's a home run. And I think our problem is that it wasn't done together and it needs to be done side by side. So with anger, a lot of my 30 minutes at the beginning of our sessions, I love to take my patients for a walk. And I'm near the beach, so it's pretty nice for me and easy to do. When someone is walking, you are decreasing their arousal and you are getting them in the present moment with you. There is more cognitive flexibility and there's more, according to the studies, more neuroplasticity available. So and if you're organized in what you're talking about, so when you say, like, how did the week go? Last week we were working on you feeling more confident in your ability to speak up and you feeling safe speaking up. Share with me this week where you were able to do that or when you wanted to do it and you couldn't. And now you're going to hear the glitches and you have an opportunity to talk about what do you think you could have done instead? Or what could you do instead? Or what do you need in order for your body to be calm enough to have been able to do that? But you're incorporating not just what could you have thought about, it's what was going on in your body that was blocking you and what was going on in your mind. So you're looking at it all and that walking. And so I have people, because I work with people of all ages, who can't walk and they can only stand up and hold on to a chair. So I will do this exercise where I have them, because it's the bottom of your feet hitting the ground and the balance, having to balance, that sends that proprioception, sends signals up through your spinal cord, like up obviously your posterior chain, blah, 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 right, to your brain. And it activates dopamine production. So wouldn't we want a little bit more focus during sessions? So walking, you're balancing, you're bilaterally stimulating, you're getting that activation. Well, if you're standing up, holding onto a chair and you're rocking forward and backwards in a certain way on your feet, and then we switch and then we do side to side, you can get a similar cognitive flexibility going and an openness. And it's a great time to talk about the things that cause people to have anger, like, this isn't okay with me. And so it's almost a little desensitized, not that they can't get emotional, but it's not out of control. And there are some times, I've only had it in 30 years twice, where punching didn't help and was not helpful. And I had to do a calming exercise right away and pivot into what we were doing. I do have instruments in my office because I do believe in drumming because of the rhythm and changing the rhythm. I have tambourines, I have sound bowls, I have tuning forks. So we can use the drums as a way of telling their story and getting the anger out. So sometimes I think people do better, like using the tambourines and, like, it's almost like a rainmaker, but something that you shake and telling the story with your emotions, with the drums, with the sound. And then after that, we breathe and get centered. And then a lot of people are ready to talk about. So it's really about being able to, shimmy your way and wiggle your way into where you're trying to help them break through.
Yeah, I really appreciate how holistic your approach is really feeling as you're describing these things. I mean, I ask like a very specific question and then you kind of expand it into all of these other aspects that are so important that's contributing to that that otherwise might be kind of overlooked if we're just looking at the one thing, if we're just looking at the anger and just trying to release it or something, we're missing all these other parts.
Well, I think that's my whole point is, um, do you remember the movie City Slickers
Hmm.
with Billy Crystal? And I remember him, there's just one thing. Everybody has their one thing. And I love Billy Crystal, so it's nothing against him. But there's never one thing. When is there ever one thing? There's not a one thing. Like, come on, it takes so many things. We're not even a one human. We're made up of other living organisms. So I just don't know. The one thing I know is that we're all one. That's probably the one thing.
Yeah. I appreciate that you also connect always kind of what is happening for the client in the body, what is happening in the mind. It sounds like very normal for you. But I think nowadays in psychotherapy, it's not necessarily the standard. At least in Europe, we kind of, divide these things, unfortunately. But if you're talking to a therapist or psychiatrist, they're not gonna assess your whole also, physical history and ask you about your chronic pain, ask you about your organs and other ailments. It's not relevant to them because they are only treating your mind. And I mean, there is now frameworks that are a bit more progressive that are also like including the body and so on. But like what you're doing sounds really even more progressive. And to be honest, very logical, like to not ignore the science of the body and the kind of the mental problems. So one example of what you mentioned is that you do first EMDR, and then afterwards you're going to do some kind of release work. And usually, after EMDR, that's where it stops. The therapist does EMDR and like they're done. So, but in your
Yeah.
experience, it was necessary to do some more work afterwards, right? So how does the healing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not only the release, but after I do the release, right? So now they have this new belief. So it's kind of like I got this new Chanel suit and I got nowhere to go. Or like, I'm not going to put it on and go to the playground. So I need to understand, like, now I believe that I'm safe. Well, how does that play out in my marriage? Or how does that play out when I go to school? And how do I wear this new belief when I go home? And some places aren't as safe as others, right? So I call that the reorganizing time. And so we talk about, okay, how's it going to feel when? And we envision that. And then we EMDR that in. And then when we actually talk about that, you'll see that other emotions bubble up. And where do they feel that in your body? So you have to work on releasing that. And again, the music, the movement, just even different exercises can help someone feel very empowered. And so I really pay attention to how somebody's sitting when they're in my office, because if somebody doesn't sit with their shoulder back and their heart open and they just learned how to feel safe and they're no longer being betrayed, how are you going to walk? I don't have to keep hiding. So I think there's a reorganizing and a rebuilding phase that happens once you develop a new belief, new thoughts. And even when you talk about new behaviors, it's almost like working with athletes. You have to practice the event in your mind. And then, even part of the homework is, hey, why don't you go home and try this? And then come back and tell me how you did. What worked about it, what didn't work about it, what felt uncomfortable. And then you can build on that. But there is a reorganizing and rebuilding, because you're reorganizing your identity. If I'm no longer powerless, if I'm no longer bad because my narcissistic parent made me feel bad for having spontaneous emotions, right? I'm using the wrong language. I felt bad in relationship to my narcissistic parent. um, and I felt like I was a bad person. And now I know I'm not. I know, like, their behavior is because of their wounds. It has nothing to do with me. I did my healing work. I took care of my inner children. I took care of my parts, whatever it is that and how I did it. But now I have a new identity. And how do I walk around in the world believing that I'm good? It really feels a little wonky, you know? And so you want to address that so that changes can be maintained and expanded upon.
I'm really curious around this sort of reorganization phase. Do you find that it's better to be like more intentional and kind of directive about what you're rebuilding? Or is it better to kind of just be more open and maybe having an awareness that this rebuilding is happening, but not necessarily directing it, kind of just allowing it to happen on its own.
It, I think most patients, you can ask them, what do you imagine it's going to look and feel like when you go home with this? And if they can't imagine it, you start breaking it down. So you wake up in the morning and you know that you are good and you feel safe. How are you going to build your morning routine to match it? So it's kind of like a tennis match where you're going back and forth. You give them a little bit, let them take it, and then you listen to what they say, and you might have to feed them a little more. It's more of a guiding, but I don't want it to, it's got to be their process, their way, because sometimes they come up with the most brilliant things that I would have never thought of. And I'm like, I'm so glad that the wisdom is in the question. And you're just doing the guiding that gets them to find their answer. Every once in a while, you do have to teach, though, right? Because you have to say things like, in a family where your parents know how to honor and adore you and appreciate you for who you are, it's kind of like you wake up in the morning and you go in the kitchen and your mother goes, my goodness, look who's here over here so I can give you a hug. And you'll see people just go blank. I never got. And that's a really important thing to see. So I think sometimes it helps when we share, like typically this happens, or if somebody can't come up with something, give them the Chinese menu, like one from column A, one from column B. Does that help?
Yeah, yeah, that I another great answer, I would say. It makes a lot of sense just in terms of, not imposing on them, but also kind of providing that containment as needed and that little bit of direction as needed.
Yeah. No, I think, I kind of struggle with, do we know where coaches ends and therapists begin? And I think when it comes to therapy, you really need to know a lot. And I think you need to know a lot attachment wise, developmental wise, learning style wise, spiritually. I think you need to understand medically. I think we need to understand what medicines do, what plants can do. Like there's I think we need to raise the bar on what we need to know and what we say is acceptable as mental health treatment. Because there's nothing worse than bad mental health treatment. And I think there's a lot of coaches out there who aren't just teaching people how to organize their homes or their businesses. They're really going into this area of thoughts, not understanding attachments, not understanding beliefs, not understanding the central nervous system and what it needs and how to do it. And they're just going, here's vagus nerve stuff, here's somatic stuff. And they're just kind of putting it together in hodgepodge. And then people get hurt, just like bad therapy hurts people, just like bad medicine hurts. But I think that if we come together as a clinical community, I think we could do better. And to me, doing better would be seeing all these aspects of a person and understanding how to pull together a treatment plan for individuals.
Very cool. So if you'd like to, what sort of offerings do you have if our listeners are interested in working with you or taking one of your programs? How can people reach you?
Well, I have a center in Boca Raton, and it's called Connected Wellness, spelled like cannabis and very uniquely. But we're there in Boca Raton, Florida. You can look me up by my name. I have other clinicians who work with me, and we'd be happy to help anybody who reaches out. We can do telehealth as well as in person. Of course, I love in person because you can hear that I like to be very hands on. But I've had my patients travel overseas to several different countries, and I've been able to do EMDR. And we will literally go for a walk at the same time, just in two different countries until they get back home. And then they'll come back and we'll finish the work up there. So we're very flexible and very available to help.
Cool. Awesome. Well, Thank you so much for your time. I feel like I've learned so much, have so many new rabbit holes to go down. Yeah, just really appreciate you. And thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.